Hello and welcome to Integrative Mental Health Clinic, the Blue Line Educational Podcasts. My name is Dr. Saeed Mushtaq. I'm a naturopathic physician, and today I would like to talk to you about adrenal fatigue, the adrenal gland, and its connection with chronic disease, inflammation, and fatigue. The adrenal gland is a small gland that sits right on top of the kidneys, and it produces four very important hormones: adrenaline, aldosterone, DHEA, and cortisol. And today we're going to talk about adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline is also called epinephrine. It's the same substance that's inside an EpiPen. It's injected during allergies or as a last resort, even directly into the heart to increase blood pressure, to get the heart going, to increase heart rate, and to also mobilize blood sugar so that the body can use this increased activity. Adrenaline is a sympathomimetic, which essentially means that it actually influences the sympathetic branch or the sympathetic part of the nervous system, of the central nervous system. And under activity of sympathetic nervous system, you always get a fight and flight or alertness reaction. So the function of adrenaline is to trigger fight and flight reaction or allow the body to be alert for decision making and whatnot. The counterpart of the sympathetic nervous system is the parasympathetic nervous system. And the way to think about these two is that the sympathetic is not so sympathetic. It is the body's reaction, or it's active when we need to actually fight or mobilize a lot of resources with a stressful situation, whether that's a physical stress, whether it's emotional stress, whether it's perceived or whether it's actual. So it can come up during situations of anxiety. It can be active during fear. It can be active during stress, or also during arduous physical activity. And the counterpart of that is the parasympathetic, which is active during digestion, during sleep, and during healing. When one of these systems or nervous systems is up, the other one is usually down, and vice versa. They're both active at all times. It's just the level of activity that influences which one of these states we are at, either fight or flight or sleep, digest, heal. So under the function of adrenaline, we get sympathetic nervous system response, we get high blood pressure, heart rate, blood sugar, we get the fight and flight reactions. The second hormone is cortisol, and unlike adrenaline, which is released in pulses during the need for the fight and flight reaction, cortisol follows a biphasic pattern of secretion. It comes up within the first 2 hours of waking. Its levels go down and it comes up again 5-6 hours later, and then it stays a steady state of a low level. So let's say you're an early riser. It comes up between 7 and 9 a.m. and then later on between 1 and 3 p.m. And its function is also to trigger the release of blood sugar or increase in blood sugar, and it does that by influencing the liver. Its secondary function is to do a similar thing in the liver, and it triggers the conversion of T4, which is the thyroid hormone, into its active 4, which is T3. And it's that's the area of its function on the liver. And the third function that it has is to actually influence inflammation. So it's an anti-inflammatory, and you might have heard of prescription corticosteroids, very strong medication that are used as anti-inflammatory in chronic conditions, anything that involves inflammation, whether it's on the skin, whether it's internal organs, whether it's digestive system, whether it's an autoimmune reaction. So this is the body's natural molecule for dealing with inflammation. And interestingly, inflammation itself produces substances called TNF and interleukin, TNF alpha interleukin. There's a number of them, and these substances are actually triggers. They are triggers for the release of cortisol into the system. So the body is designed to deal with inflammation. When there is inflammation, you release cortisol to deal with the inflammation. What happens in a stage of adrenal fatigue essentially is the production of all these molecules start becoming less. And in the case of cortisol, what happens is there is you can initially have the morning phase stay the same, and the afternoon levels start declining. And that's where people start experiencing fatigue, tiredness, craving for sugar, craving for stimulants in the afternoon because their adrenal gland is not really up to par, so you actually try to get that through external stimulants. Secondarily, what can happen is that you can have both the morning curves and the afternoon curves come down. So that is not only afternoon fatigue and weakness, but in the morning there's difficulty waking up. And then lastly, what can happen is that this part of the curve, the second curve, can get shifted towards later in the afternoon, which is where a person feels fatigue all night, and then in the afternoon they get a second wind, and sometimes they even have difficulty sleeping because cortisol is high, blood sugars are elevated, and the sympathetic nervous system is active, so this function of sleep, heal, and digest is not active. Now, interestingly, when there is inflammation and fatigue, as a general rule, the quality of sleep changes, which means the quality of healing and digestion also changes. And when there is chronic inflammation, so these interleukins, these inflammatory molecules, when they're at very high level, at low levels they stimulate cortisol, but at very high level they do the exact opposite. And they do that by influencing and blocking the function of central nervous system on the cortisol. The central nervous system makes a molecule called ACTH, or adrenocorticotropic hormone, and its function is to stimulate the function of cortisol and give it a signal to produce these molecules. But inflammation under the influence of interleukin and TNFs, it actually blocks the interaction of ACTH, so it blocks the influence of the central nervous system on the adrenal gland, which means that when there is chronic low-grade inflammation, or where there's chronic inflammation that is unresolved in a case, the function of adrenal gland, instead of going up, which is what you would expect, it actually comes even further down. So this is the hallmark of adrenal fatigue, where there is a decoupling of cortisol, there is a change in the cortisol shift, there's a reduced overall activity of the adrenal gland, and there is a buildup of chronic inflammation and the general feeling of fatigue. Now, one thing to understand about adrenal fatigue is that it's not a disease per se. It is a functional state. It's a change in the function of adrenal glands. So if you look at the adrenal gland, there's really nothing to be seen as a pathology, but the function of it has been reduced, and that it is part of pretty much every single condition that is chronic and that has inflammation and fatigue as part of it. So be it autoimmune disorders, be it diseases of the central nervous system and neurological diseases, be it mood disorders, which increasingly there is research showing that there is inflammation as part of things like such as depression even. So even though it's not a disease per se, it's a condition that it's a functional condition that's found in a lot of diseases. And what is important about adrenal fatigue is that unless the fatigue and the ability of the adrenal gland is addressed, and unless its production of hormones is balanced, it's very difficult often to actually improve any chronic condition that has inflammation as its part. So I hope this has been a clear understanding of adrenal fatigue and why is it important to actually deal with it when there is chronic conditions. This has been the Blue Line Educational Podcast. Please don't forget to visit my website, imhclinic.com, and don't forget to follow the Blue Line. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.